Yes, yes. Now we
Yeah, we're live.
okay. Perfect. Um, yes, perfect. Um, okay, awesome. Let's get started then. Um, Thank you so much, everyone who has waited for us. Sorry about the little bit of delay, but let's get going. Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us today on a Saturday evening for this fun live chat show, SciComm Souls, that showcases the unique journeys of science communicators. I am Suchita Champak, the founder of SciRio, and with me is Shweta Hegde, a student at the Regional Institute of Education, Mysore, who's hosting the show with me. For anyone new to SciRio, here's a brief introduction. SciRio is an independent enterprise building an ecosystem for capacity building and opportunity exploration for science communicators. And today's show, SciComm Souls, is an essential part of SciRio because it underscores that science communication and communicators can have different backgrounds, formats, and contexts that you do not have to follow a defined path, right? So every episode showcases one unique journey. This is our 9th episode of SciComm Souls, streaming live on LinkedIn and YouTube. So don't worry if you have missed out on the previous episodes. You can find them all on our YouTube channel, whose link is in the chat section. Do check them out, and if you have found them useful, do share them with your friends and colleagues. Now let's get started with today. Today we have Shreya Ghosh, who will be chatting with us on her humbling experiences and opportunities that she has explored through her journey. Hi Shreya, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll let Shweta introduce you briefly and then we can get started.
Okay. Thanks so much, Suchita. As Suchita said, we are today showcasing the unique journey of Shreya, the science communication as a science communicator. Shreya is a professional science writer and editor. So after completing a PhD in neuroscience from TIFR Mumbai, Shreya joined IndiaBiosciences as a program manager in science communication. In her 3 years at IndiaBiosciences, Shreya commissioned, edited, and published several science news and feature stories and acted as the primary editor for multiple in-house publications. So Shreya has recently joined European Molecular Biology Laboratory as the communications editor. Maybe she'll talk more about it today. With that, welcome Shreya. Welcome to SciComm Souls.
Thank you, Shweta.
Okay, maybe we should get started from the beginning. So, as an integrated PhD student, how did science communication begin for you? Like, when during the PhD you realized that, okay, science communication is my calling?
Yeah, I don't think there was a specific moment when I decided that, hey, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. In fact, I haven't had that moment yet. Things may yet change. But the way it happened for me was that about halfway into my PhD, I realized that an academic career was not for me. I didn't particularly enjoy bench work. I didn't want to set up my own lab. There wasn't a single pressing scientific question that I wanted to investigate as PIs do. And at that point, into my third and fourth year, I still enjoyed the process of doing science, learning about science, working with researchers, working in that whole environment. But the end goal, I realized, was something different from what the traditional academic path leads you towards. And at that point, this was quite a few years ago. Nowadays, more discussions, more forums where we talk about non-traditional career or non-academic career options. But at that point, there really wasn't that much talk about it. So I felt like I was starting from scratch. Good thing is that Google exists, and it existed. and I started looking for what other things people go on to do after they have done their research. And till then, my exposure to science communication was pretty limited. I have always been a reader, so popular science books are something that I have enjoyed for most of my life. And I knew there were people who wrote these books, but I used to think that they are largely scientists doing it on their spare time. I didn't know that this was something that's a full-time profession. It's not just researchers moonlighting as writers and bringing out things from time to time, or journalists moonlighting as science journalists and bringing things out. There is this intersection where someone can build a career. There were some pretty good websites from where I got some knowledge. At that time, I think Science Careers had ran, was it Science Careers? I don't remember. It might have been the Nature Careers website. One of them ran a series of interviews with science journalists, and that was pretty inspiring for me. But at that point, I realized that I needed to figure out a couple of things for myself. First is this a profession that I would enjoy? I mean, it's always easy to look at something from the outside and say, hey, this is the perfect career path for me. But when you are actually inside it, when you are living the day-to-day reality of it, it turns out things are different. So I wanted to figure out if this is the sort of work I would enjoy. And I also had to figure out if this is something I had any aptitude or talent for. It might be that this is simply not my cup of tea at all. So I started with a blog, as many science writers do. Again, there were multiple reasons for choosing this route. One was I was still a full-time PhD student. I had to choose something that I would have time for after my experiments of the day were over and all of that. And I also wanted a bit more flexibility in terms of, I knew that I could not, for example, if I were to write for publications, there would be strict deadlines, and that's not something I thought I had the bandwidth for at that moment halfway through my PhD. The blog let me set my own schedule. So that's how I started. I started writing in this blog. I picked up a lot of the technical know-how behind it. And about a year later, I realized, first of all, that yes, this is something I really enjoyed doing, and that yes, maybe I have a teeny tiny bit of talent for it, or at least I wasn't awful at it. And at that point, the NCBS Science Journalism course that is conducted by Anil Anantswamy, and that year Peter Aldhaus from BuzzFeed News was one of the instructors, and that was happening that year, and I applied for it. I was selected as one of the 10 participants, and those were 2 weeks of intensive training in science journalism that if I can think of a turning point, I think that was the turning point, because those 2 weeks made it clear that this is something I can spend days, weeks, months, years doing and not get bored. And but after that course was over, I still had to finish my thesis, so I came back to Mumbai, finished my PhD, defended my thesis. While I was doing this, I applied for internships in science journalism. I got through one in this journal called Biotechniques and their news section. So that was also a year of exposure to international science journalism, plus I could get a number of clips and build my portfolio. And once I finished my PhD, I started looking for positions in India, and the IndiaBioscience job was luckily advertised at that same time. And again, because with the blogging, the course, the internship, I had 3 years of science communication experience by this point. So that allowed me to apply for that position. And then came IndiaBioscience, which were 3 years of, again, I think pretty intensive learning and communicating and networking and meeting a lot of wonderful people, which I think greatly contributed to my journey. But I think I've gone much beyond the scope of what you asked, Shweta. But this is how during my PhD I came into this new field.
Oh no, we're so glad you shared this entire your journey in a nutshell, right? So,
Yeah.
I couldn't hear you. Were you saying something?
Me? No. I was
Okay.
waiting for you to ask me something.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a lag in my video. So, okay,
Yeah.
yes. So, I mean, we're so glad you shared the entire journey that you've gone through so far. So, maybe you could take us through your writing journey, right? So, has becoming a better writer made you more humble yet conscious about how and what you write? Tell us more about how you've evolved as a writer and editor so far.
Yeah. So, yeah, writing is how I started. I do other forms of science communication, but science writing still remains my first love, so to say. And I think what helped here is that I have always been a writer, I would say, not a science writer, but since I was a child, I always expressed myself best through writing rather than through speaking to people, which I still suck at. But what helped, I think, the most in my journey is knowing that there is always more to learn, that there is never going to be a point when I think to myself that I am now a good enough writer, I don't need to learn anymore. That's never going to happen. And that's true for most people. You can always improve your craft. Writing is a craft. It is something that is learned. It is something that you have to practice to get better at. It's not going to happen just by theoretically learning about it. And it's somewhere, another thing that has helped me is feedback. This is also why I think it's very important to put your writing out there for people to actually see, to open it up to criticism. And I think the best learning experiences I've had is when editors, other people have commented upon my work that, hey, maybe this part could have been phrased differently, or maybe what were you trying to say here, and how could this be said maybe differently and slightly more in a better way. And so my editors, Christy, others have been very, very helpful in this regard. And as mentioned, I'm still learning. Like many of us here in India, English is not my first language and it's not even my second language. So it's initially that may seem like a barrier, but that's something that you overcome pretty easily. It's easy to learn the mechanics of a language. I think what takes time is understanding how to bring in elegance or how to phrase a thought in a way that that is simple yet meaning impactful at the same time. And yeah, if you're going to speak about specific lessons on writing, I think things like less is always more. The simpler you can put it, the more meaningful the communication is going to be. Again, having a logical flow or a narrative is more important than using the best words. And I think I'm quoting somebody here that all writing is essentially rewriting. Your first draft is always going to suck, no matter how experienced you get or how many articles you have published. So you should always be ready to like murder your babies and rewrite a piece from the beginning. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
that's a lot about writing. Yeah.
Awesome. So, I mean, you had mentioned to us that, when you were reflecting upon your early days, you could see that in your pieces at the beginning that you can still like see those rookie mistakes that you've made, and also had that what you say you call that audacity which you wished you had right now, right? So, I mean, do you want
Yeah.
to like talk a little bit about that, and how I mean, can you say that it has mellowed you down, or are you conscious? You want to discuss that?
Yeah, I guess what I meant by that when I was just starting out as a writer, I think I found myself taking more risks, perhaps simply because I didn't know any better. I didn't even know that those were risks at certain points. So writing about fields I had zero idea or experience about, and I still try to do that. I think that's something any science writer should do. Challenge yourself to go out and find out about areas of research you know absolutely nothing about. And I think the specific piece I was saying this to you, Suchita, in context of was this piece on a paper in astronomy, something that is as far away from my background in biological sciences as can be. But it's something I found fascinating, and I decided to just go ahead and write about it. And again, this was an early piece for my blog. I didn't know about the inverted pyramid structure. I spent like 4 paragraphs perhaps in introduction before actually going to the meat of the story. And I didn't interview any of the scientists. I relied mostly on my interpretation of the paper, and all of these were those rookie mistakes I was talking about. But I still feel proud of myself for trying that and writing the piece and putting it out there. And later on, I think about 6 months after it had been published on my blog, I decided to write to the scientist. I think it was somebody in the US, and telling them, hey, I wrote this blog about your paper. And he actually replied back saying, hey, it's a really nice piece. Thank you for featuring us. And that was highly, highly validating. But basically, I think the lesson from this is, even if it seems like something that's out of your comfort zone, it's always good to at least attempt it. And again, everything that I have written, I've found if I go back and read it, I would find ways of writing it differently if I were to do it again today, of editing pieces of it. And that's always going to be the case. No piece that you put out is ever going to be perfect. And this is something that took me some time, because to learn, initially I would spend hours just editing a piece again and again and again until like it felt like it's in a shape that I can put it out in. But the truth is, you'll never reach that level of perfection, and beyond a point it's just diminishing returns. So there's I think, make sure your facts are accurate and then put it out there.
Awesome. The bottom line being, getting out of your comfort zone never hurts. It always brings you memorable moments, right?
Yeah, so, it hurt, but it's a good kind of hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if we want to talk a little bit about your tenure at IndiaBioscience as a program manager, right? So, how aligned were your interests for science communication with the responsibilities of that role? Tell us a little bit.
Yeah. So my role at IndiaBioscience was really exciting and interesting. It's different from what I had expected when I had applied for the job, because I had expected, with the title Program Manager Science Communication, I had initially I had thought it's going to be restricted to whatever's put out on the website, the news stories, the articles, and editing them and getting them into shape. But what was really great, and this goes to the leadership, Smita Jain, who was my supervisor there and the executive director of IndiaBioscience at that time, she had a really wide creative vision, and she was very, very supportive of every member of the team coming up with their new ideas, of thinking of new directions we can expand in, thinking of new ways of doing things, thinking of where IndiaBioscience could serve a purpose that's probably not being served in the scientific community of India. And that was a tremendous growth opportunity for me, because I could see that while the website, obviously, the articles on the website remained my primary responsibility, but I was also free to branch out and think of other ways of doing things. And I had some fantastic colleagues who also were sort of thinking the same way, and they started initiatives I could participate in. So I think during my tenure at India Bioscience, the webinar series was started, the podcast series was started. Lakshmi was responsible for both of these. Then there were workshops, programs, many things that I could participate in. And this, I think, led to, it was a great opportunity for me, of course, because I could learn a lot of things. But it was also, I think, good for the life science community in India as a whole, because it led to the creation of some really good resources that are still out there and that people can still take advantage of. So when I was there, my role, I would say, was 50% of editorial work for the different publications that India Bioscience put out, the stuff that it put on its website, all of those. But 50% was project management and in a variety of fields. And again, I think that was crucial in bringing me where I am today. So yeah, those 3 years were pretty exciting. And I was working there till May this year when I finally had to leave due to moving to a different country. Otherwise, I would have stayed. But yeah, I'll always be grateful to India Bioscience.
Awesome. So, would you credit that freedom or experimentation that you had to the environment that was there? Because it's very different from independent enterprises or from an academic setup where they have a science communication department or a cell, right? So, would you credit it to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the environment, the level of flexibility you get, the sort of missions the organization has and how clearly defined they are, all of these make a big difference. And for me, I think I got really lucky with the combination of circumstances. I wouldn't say this is unique to India Bioscience. Many places can create such an environment for myself, and perhaps it exists in other places as well. And I think the key ingredients of that environment are these: the independence, the flexibility, the combined with responsibility and with a clear mission. So all of those together, I think, helped.
I'm making notes here.
Yes, maybe SciRio is going to be the next.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So, as humble as you are also very vocal about how privilege and luck has played a major role in jumpstarting your career as a science communicator, right? So, what do you feel so? And of course, I mean, you did mention a little bit. So, do you want to describe a little more and how complementing is skill and talent to it?
Yeah. So yeah, the thing about, I guess, luck and hard work is that it's not it has to be and, it's not or. You don't need either hard work or luck. You need both of them at the same time, because otherwise you're not going to get anywhere. But you do need a bit of both. And again, as I said, I think I have had always the privilege of being at the right place at the right time, perhaps. I did my PhD from TIFR, which is one of the more better known institutes in India. So I had a great atmosphere there, and I could build a solid network there, because in India Bioscience, it was important that I had ties to the scientific community in India, and my PhD at TIFR went a good way towards establishing that. I had a really supportive advisor during my PhD who was fine with me taking time off to take a science journalism course, who was okay with me blogging about research, who was fine with me not wanting to do a postdoc after my PhD, and that counted for a lot. And with that support came trust, that here is someone who believed that I could make a career for myself in this way, and that was very important when I was really young, and unsure of myself. And then landing at India Bioscience, again, it was being in the right place at the right time for the organization as well as for myself. And in addition to luck, there is privilege. Science communication, as you know, in India, it's still in pretty early stages. Their infrastructure is not there, which means mechanisms of funding are limited. It means so even not just being in science communication, I think right now even being in science, most people who do come from a position of privilege that allows them that time to stay for maybe years in relatively low paying positions, just learning your craft until you can reach a position of stability. And that's also where privilege comes in, that I was maybe born to the right family in the right time and the right sort of circumstances, that I could actually follow this as a passion. And that, I think that's something we all need to be conscious of, because I think there are many talented individuals out there who are being prevented from having the same sort of career path because they haven't had those privileges simply by conditions of birth, perhaps. And the reason I speak about this, because I think we do not have enough schemes or enough programs or anything right now in place to increase diversity of the individuals who are in science communication, and any field would only benefit from there being more diversity. So maybe not in terms of gender, perhaps, because I think science communication is one of the very few fields of science in India where actually women are in the majority, but definitely in terms of class, in terms of caste, in terms of socioeconomic status, basically, it is a position for the privileged. So, yeah, that's what I meant. Basically that I have almost always had a well-paying job to support me in my passion, which is not what everybody gets.
Absolutely. I'm saying that you do acknowledge that. It's very important for us to, I mean, there are a lot of factors that you can't really control or change, but it's always very important to be aware of such things, right? So, thank you so much for talking about that. So now, quickly moving on to the present, right? So, talk to us a little bit more about the current role and how your experience has been so far. I know it's not been a very long time, but
yeah. Yeah. So I would say, take the next part I say with a pinch of salt, because I've only been less than a month at my present role, and maybe things might change as time goes on. But yeah, so as you said, I recently joined the European Molecular Biology Laboratory, EMBL, in Heidelberg, Germany, as a communications editor. So EMBL is a pretty unique organization in that it is an intergovernmental organization. So it is funded not by one country, not just by Germany where it's located, but by 27 different countries. And it tries to serve all of these communities, and its research community is actually highly multinational. So good thing for me is that it means the language for communication is English, which was a criteria for me while looking for jobs in Germany, because my German is pretty bad. So the communications department at EMBL does a lot of things. In addition to like any institutional comms office, it tries to raise the organization's profile. It tries to talk about the research that's happening within the organization. It also tries, because EMBL is such a unique organization, and its aim is not just to do good research, but also to elevate the European life science ecosystem as a whole. So it tries to do that by providing services, providing training, trying to have better international relations within countries and things like that. the communications department plays a role there as well. So my role is again as an editor, so I try to maintain a level of quality control over everything that goes out, and try to make sure that the tone and voice of the organization is consistent across everything it puts out, and yeah, basically assist with different communications projects. So it's interesting. It's a very international team. Uh, it has a lot of different aspects and that I'm still picking up on. And yeah, one of my aims for joining here is to understand how an organization like this functions and how the science communication ecosystem in Europe basically functions, so that because it is a slightly more mature system than India's, in that it has been around for longer, perhaps in a greater capacity, and maybe there are lessons to be learned here that can be applied when I eventually return to India. So yeah, I'm very excited. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm so glad for you, and all the very best. Have fun, and I hope this experience is fulfilling and you get to scale through and learn a lot.
Thank you.
Awesome. So now let's move on to the next segment, that is the rapid fire. So where we have a lot of questions to ask you, but we need to squeeze through time. So we request you to have the answers short, and maybe if we have any questions from the audience, we can pick that up forward towards the end, right? So, okay, let's get started then. Just a couple of true or false questions to begin with. So you don't need to be a good writer to be an editor. True or false?
I would say false. You have to have a basic understanding of how, not just of the language, but of what constitutes good writing and how you distinguish it from good and bad writing. And I think once you have that knowledge, you can be a good writer as well as a good editor.
Awesome. Okay, perfectionism is the devil. True or false?
True. I mean, I call myself a recovering perfectionist because I think I have had perfectionistic tendencies for most of my life, and I don't think it has served me very well. I think the pursuit of excellence is always something good to have, but perfectionism brings with that arbitrary standards and a need for approval that don't serve your craft well. So yes, it is the devil.
Okay, so you also mentioned to us that you hate most of your pieces once they are published. So what's one thing you do when you feel like an imposter, or you feel that you can do better?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a seesaw for me. Like, it depends on how I'm feeling at the time, because sometimes if I'm in a low mood, if I go back and look at my past works, I feel like, what is this? Why have I ever put this out anywhere? This sucks. But at other times, it can actually serve as a motivating factor. See, you actually finished all of these pieces. You can finish the next one. So I think I don't have an antidote to the imposter syndrome, but I think it helps to know that everyone feels it to some extent, and two, it's probably a mark that it's usually felt by people who are actually good at something or want to be better at something. So I would take that as a symptom of that instead of, as a fact of life.
Well, that's a nice upside to it. How essential has building a network or being a part of a like-minded community been for you?
Oh, it's been absolutely essential, I would say. I think it started for me with the NCBS journalism course, where I met Siddharth, Anusha, a lot of people who later became colleagues and friends. And again, I would say specifically in India, because it's such a small community, it really helps to learn from to speak to more people, learn from the experiences of others, to exchange favors, it's networking is not just about what you can get from other people, it's about what you can do for others. And I see networking as relationship building, about forging connections with people who may one day be colleagues and friends. And at least in my science communication journey, it has been very, very useful in terms of gaining information, in terms of getting access to resources, in terms of and simply having people to bounce ideas off and think about getting feedback and things like that.
Absolutely. I think when people understand that networking is a two-way journey and building a relationship, a lot of things change and it always gets better.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you overcome a writer's block?
I think initially my approach was to just sort of distract myself and wait for it to go away, and sometimes that's still a good approach. Sometimes what you need is a break, go and do something else for 15 minutes and come back. But sometimes it's also helps to just power through it, which is sometimes I set a timer and just close my eyes and type, and my criteria for them, it basically helps to turn off your inner editor when you're writing. If you try to write and edit at the same time, you're not going to get anywhere. So for me, that's the best way to get past a block, to set a target for myself to write without thinking about the quality of what's coming out that can be fixed later, but just to get the words down on paper. Things get easier after that.
Great. Okay, as an editor, saying no to a piece is hard, really hard. How have you coped with it?
Can you, repeat that? I think the voice broke for a minute.
Is it better?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, as an editor, saying no to a piece is hard. How have you coped with it?
Yeah, it is hard. When we get at IndiaBioscience, at least we used to get a lot of many really good, excellent pitches, but obviously any publication's capacity is limited, so you have to prioritize certain things above others, so you have to say no. I think so as an editor, what helps is again having that mission clearly in mind so that you can set priorities readily. But as I also tried my best to make it easier on the writer, trying to make sure that I conveyed that it's the piece and not the writer that I was rejecting, that it's not about who you are, but about what this particular story is. And many times I think I would try to find ways of maybe coming at it from a different angle or a different approach. Sometimes the exact story pitched may not be something that fits your publication, but if maybe there's some side to it, some angle to it, something that leads off it, that might be a good avenue to explore later on. So whenever I spotted something like this, I tried to make it clear to the writer. So
That's awesome. That's really a lifesaver for editors, I'm sure. Okay, so one last question to this segment. So, what's something that you had to unlearn to become a science communicator?
Yeah, I think the way we are taught writing when we are scientists is very different from what you need when you are science communicators. That is assuming you're taught writing as a scientist at all, which many researchers are not as part of our PhD programs. But it's important to something that I had to learn basically is one, to gauge your audience more clearly, to understand who are the people who are going to be reading my piece and the level of knowledge they have. And also to fight the tendency of wanting to give a lot of background up front before going into the meat of the story. I think when we write a scientific paper, start with an introduction, then go into methods, then go into results. Whereas with a story, like a news story, it's the opposite. You start with the conclusion and your background is minimal. So learning not to explain a lot firsthand was something that I had to pick up on.
Wow, that was an interesting answer. usually I try to, whenever I have a question, I try to see, okay, what the answer could be. And for this, I mean, I never really expected this. I'm glad you shared that with me. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for participating in this segment. And now we'll get on to discuss in detail a little bit more on one of your latest work. Or I think that was your last work at India Bioscience. And
Yeah.
I'll let Shweta head on with that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I had a wonderful time listening to both of you. I've literally been typing notes, so especially when you spoke about perfectionism and how to improve your craft and asking for feedback and all of that. So thank you so much. It's been so useful, especially for me. So with that, let's go ahead with the thought process segment where we take a piece from our guest and sort of explore it in depth. So today we are going to talk about Drishti, which is compendium of mental articles about mental health. So this booklet was designed, edited, and also compiled by Shreya. So maybe you might start off by talking a little bit about the vision of this booklet, and maybe also I'm also curious about why you named it Drishti. So maybe you can speak a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, this was one of my final projects at India Bioscience, and also I would say this is not just my project. A huge number of people contributed to this, and this would not have been possible without them. Very little of the content in this is actually mine. It comes from a set of very talented authors, artists, many others. So the way this came about, and I think it started probably in 2019 or even earlier than that. So Smita, who was again then the executive director at India Bioscience, I remember she came into our office one day and she was saying something like, we need to be writing about mental health in academia. And that's something I had been thinking about myself for a number of months. So hearing that resonance was, it was like the sign I had been waiting for. And I was like, we can start right away. And it's interesting. Again, a lot of different things fell into place at the same time. While we were discussing this, I had pitches from a couple of, again, very talented writers wanting to talk about mental health. And the way we thought about it is we wanted to publish a series of articles on our website, and we wanted to publish them around the World Mental Health Day, which comes in October each year. And we wanted them to come from multiple perspectives, not just from the perspective of students or from the perspective of institutes, or we wanted people talking about their experiences. We wanted some numbers, some data, something concrete that we could recommend to people. And we wanted, basically we wanted to tie it all together somehow. And I think another person I should mention here is Devdutt Paul. He was a researcher at that time. He was at the same institute as me when I did my PhD, and he's, I think, a full-time science writer now with Research Matters. And he was very keen on writing about mental health. And when he spoke to me about it, I suggested, why don't we do an investigative piece? And that's actually the first article in this compendium. And we realized that there is no data or hardly any data about mental health support in Indian academia, about mental health in general. I mean, whatever data existed was pretty old or pretty limited. So we decided to do a survey and do a story on the basis of that survey and start from there. But obviously, this was more work than we had imagined. It took us a year to complete the survey and analyze all that data. By that time, COVID, I think, was almost upon us. But we finally put those first two pieces out. And what I really liked about those was that we had managed to come up with not just data related to the current status of mental health in academia, but also a set of recommendations as to what institutes could do, what people in power could do to improve the situation for everybody. That forms a part, the second part of this article, the one you are showing right now, Shweta. So when that piece was published, we were started thinking about ways to expand its reach. Of course, it's there online, it's there on the website, but it's another thing to get the people who should be reading it actually reading it. They may not be people who visit India Biosciences website every day, or who are on Twitter, or who are on LinkedIn. So the idea of a print publication like this came from there. We wanted something that could be either printed or could be shared as an email attachment, as a PDF, and that could go out to a large number of people at once. So, and by that time, these articles were fine, but we wanted more perspective. So I sent out an open call for pitches from the scientific community or the science writer community about mental health, and I was really overwhelmed by the number of responses we received. There were so many excellent pitches, more than I knew what to do with. And then I realized it's not just going to be a 3-4 article series, it's going to be something big. And we started, I think, publishing it from 2019, and it went on for 2 full years that we started putting these articles out. In the middle, COVID happened. So again, that was another aspect we had to explore, because mental health is something that COVID has had a huge impact on, not just in our country, everywhere. And we could not ignore that aspect of it at all. So once this was done, once we had about, I think, 2 years worth of material, and the idea of a consolidated place to put it out is when this booklet was sort of born. And I think I had wanted to do this while I was still at India Bioscience, but too many other things were going on. So when I had left India Bioscience and I had a couple of months of free time sort of in between roles, that's when I could actually dedicate a little time to putting all of these together in one place, in this one booklet. And I had wonderful support from the India Bioscience team throughout all of these, with their suggestions, ideas, things I could put into this. And then once it was finished, so the name Drishti came at the very end. Actually, it was not the name we had for the project as while it was going on. But India Bioscience has been producing collections and compendia for some time. And mostly we try to grow with a feminine Sanskrit word that sort of reflects upon some aspect of what we are concentrating on in that particular publication. So, for example, Disha was the name of our book on career paths. Spurti was the name of our compendium on women in science in India. So Drishti sort of followed that tradition, and the idea here was the Drishti means sight, vision, and one of the main issues around mental health in India is how stigmatized it is, how hidden it is, how little we speak about it compared to the amount of importance it actually has. And with Drishti, I think my idea was to touch upon that idea of bringing things to light, things that were previously hidden. So that was the idea behind this compendium. I would encourage everybody to go read it. Some wonderful writers have contributed some really, really insightful thoughts to this. And another thing is that each article is something we insisted on, was that whenever we talk about a problem, we also talk about solutions. So each article which highlights a particular issue in the context of mental health also tries to highlight certain possible solutions to the problem which we thought was important to talk about. So that's how it came about. Of course, it has its disadvantages as well. It's a static application. It's difficult to update it. It's also distributed largely digitally because it's available for free, so people can print out their own copies if they want, but we still need to think about reach with publications like this. But overall, yes, I'm happy with how this came out.
That's awesome. Yeah, distribution is always a bottleneck when you want more reach and beyond just the internet or just your website, right? So
Yeah.
that's awesome. And also talking about how this went out to be, right? So since mental health is such a sensitive issue, and I'm sure surveying, interviewing, and all of that must be a very challenging process. So could you talk us through the challenges and how you worked your way around it, especially at the time where people don't want to open up, or rather the environment is not so conducive?
Yeah. So I guess we're talking about the article called Hidden in Plain Sight, which was based on a lot of data collected through our survey. Yes, I agree completely. It was challenging. I think good for me that most of the challenging parts were done by my co-authors. Devdatta and Annapurna really came through on this. They managed to, they interviewed almost, I think, 30 different people face to face. I mean, on the phone or Zoom or face to face, like one-on-one interviews. We didn't want to just rely on the results of a survey, which is online, which only goes out via the internet and which would have a slightly skewed ratio of people, which was the case. We had a lot of responses from people in the so-called premier institutes and very little from people in universities, colleges, which is why the one-on interviews were so important. And I think something that they realized, Annapurna and Devdatta, while doing these interviews is that how little awareness there is about what constitutes mental health issues, what falls under that whole definition, and what is an issue, what, like, you see both ends of the spectrum. You see a great deal of normalization. People start to think that this is the way things are and they should be. I mean, this is not really a problem because everyone goes through this and stress is a part of life and things like that. There's been a lot of conditioning and normalization of people in academia particularly. So that was a challenge that they had of while speaking to people, working around the limit of knowledge the interviewee has and getting them to open up. We also had to promise anonymity to almost everybody before. This is again, it would have been great if we could have more people speaking on record, but it's completely understandable that people don't feel comfortable doing so yet, given the conditions that there are. And so we made sure that the data was anonymized before we visualized it. We made sure that whoever asked to be anonymous, we did not name them in the article. A few of the other articles also are based on informal surveys, and we followed the same guideline for everybody. We give people control over whether or not they wanted to be named or not. And I think that also led to more people speaking their minds. And we also treated, obviously, these responses as subjective. Everybody's reality is different. Everybody's worldview is different. If somebody in an interview says things are a certain way, it does not necessarily mean that without verification. So we tried to have different sources confirming something before we actually put it in the article. So the article is maybe 4,000 words, but it has a year of work and data behind it. So in the end, we only retained those parts that could be verified, that can be that we can comment upon. We made sure that we spoke about caveats in the data collection process or whatever. Clearly, we mentioned that this is not a truly random sampling. This is not truly representative data. This is an indication, and follow-up studies are needed. And I think that's important for anybody who's trying to do a data-based story in any field, to understand the limits of your data, understand what sort of conclusions you can draw from data and not, and wherever possible have human sources backing up that data. So I don't think we could have written the story on the basis of the survey alone. We needed those 30 or 40 one-on-one interviews that Devdatta and Annapurna actually went out and did, and that gave us the insight necessary to write this. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
Yeah,
So,
so
yeah.
I think it was brilliantly done. Even the limitations were clearly laid out, and I think that data journalism piece was amazing. So, speaking broadly about the booklet itself, how did you ensure that all the voices were properly heard, and how did you pick these articles and sort of organize them in the structure so that it made sense to the reader and that it would sort of evoke some response from the higher ups or anything as such?
Yeah. Again, yeah, I think it is not possible to make anything truly representative in a country of our size and the scales that we operate under. So again, I guess my aim was to make it, you can't reach perfection as always, to make it as representative as we could with the resources we had and with the time frame we were working under. So all of the articles that are part of this compendium were first published on the India Bioscience website. So they were first pitched as articles to me as an editor, and some of them were organic. They came, the writers just came to me with ideas, whereas in other cases there was a specific call for pitches that they answered. And I guess while selecting these stories, what I was going for was, one, to see that we were not revisiting the same topic again and again, that each of the pieces focused on something slightly different. The authors themselves, again, are largely the younger generation of academicians, and I think that could not be avoided given they're often the ones most vocal about it. But at least for the data journalism piece, we tried to get some senior researchers also commenting upon the situation. And so the organization of the booklet, so since these were first published on the website and later made into a compendium, the sections emerged later. So it was not like we decided the sections and solicited stories in each, but I think what I did was basically collect all the stories in one place once we had published them and try to see if there were themes that were emerging from them. And we could see that these fell into certain broad categories, things that commented on different aspects of life in academia that leads to mental health issues, some things that comment on intersectionality. How is it for women in science? How is it for the LGBTQ community in science? And we decided to put those into one place. We also had a number of articles on the initiatives that people have taken to combat mental health issues, whether they be workshops or programs or societies or things like that. So those we could put into one place. And COVID, of course, had to have its own separate section. And one decision I made was to have the "You Are Not Alone" section right up at front, because I think that's something many of us struggle with. I have been in academia, I have friends who have been in academia, and many of us feel that we are unique in the challenges we are facing, in the way we are dealing with them, that everyone else is coping fine and I can't, and that leads to a lot of added distress. And that's why I wanted to put that up front, that many people, that this is common, but this is not okay. So that's how it came about. Yeah, it was very much post facto. So
right. Okay, so maybe then you could also talk a little bit about how the response has been. Like, have you heard back from people as to they found it useful, or talk a little more about that.
Yeah, I think this is where probably I am lacking a bit of data because I have been out of the India Bioscience system since this got published. So, for actual statistics on how many people have viewed it or downloaded it, I guess I don't have that information. So most of the response I have seen has been on social media or from the writers who have written to me, and that has been pretty good. I think we need many more efforts like this. We are still at a point where the level of challenges faced by our academicians, particularly those who are at the early stages, PhDs, postdocs, which that the level of distress they face is unacceptable. This is not something we can continue to have at the level it is now. So I see more people speaking about it on Twitter, sometimes on LinkedIn. I think that is a good start. And again, I don't think it's just Drishti. I think a lot of other initiatives have also come out. Life of Science did a really good series on mental health, I think around the same time as we did. There are workshops, webinars, and my hope is that this all forms a collective movement that slowly moves us towards a position where solutions are actually reachable, amenable, where those can actually be put into practice. So yeah.
I completely agree on that. I hope that time comes very soon, and Drishti is probably doing its work out there in the world.
I hope so.
Yeah. Let's end on the lighter note. Maybe you could. I really love the design of the whole booklet. So I'm assuming you were involved in the design and all the images and all the visualizations. Could you also talk a little bit about how that came about to you?
Sure. So yeah, design is something that happened almost by accident, I would say. I have no design training. This is not something I do as a primary job role or anything. I think so. India Biosciences publications, we have worked with some very talented external designers, but we have also designed things in-house. Sometimes the reason was the level of funding we had for a particular project. If we could pay a designer, we would pay them. If we could not, we would do it ourselves. And I think the first time I designed something for India Biosciences is when I was putting together a small booklet, again, a magazine style booklet highlighting some of the publications we had in a year, which was called Imprint. And I learned how to use the software at that point. So it was very, very new to me. And with Drishti, basically what I wanted was a consistent something visual effect. I wanted all the stories to hang together well. I think we have partially succeeded in that. The images that accompany each article, sometimes they were generated by the writers themselves. Thank you. Yeah, sometimes the writers also had quite a bit of say in that. They had their suggestions. Sometimes they created graphics themselves. Some of the later graphics were created by me, the blue and purple ones particularly, because I wanted a visual theme. And ultimately, I guess that's how it went together. I wanted something that looked attractive, that looked like a magazine or something that one would I didn't want it to have an academic feel at all. So that factored into many of the design decisions. And also, given my limitations in a technical capacity, I wanted to keep things as simple as possible. So that's why almost every article looks pretty similar. So once that was decided, we could go with that. And I relied a lot on public domain resources, images, stock art, stuff that is easy to get from anywhere. So yeah, that's how things went, and I hope the final result is something that people can consume easily.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much for talking about Drishti and also the entire journey that you've gone through at India Bioscience and all the other experiences that you've had. To sort of wrap this entire thing up, we have a few questions that we do. One is from Devanshi, one of our interns at SciRio. So she's very cute.
Sucheta, sorry to interrupt. Can you give me a few seconds? I need to plug in my computer or it will go to sleep. Just give me a second, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, sorry about that.
Not a
I'm
problem.
back.
Okay. So let me read the question. Do you think one needs to climb the similar ladder as yours in order to apply for a similar position at EMBL?
I don't think so, I would say, because my colleagues come from many different paths and places. Some of them do have academic backgrounds, that they have done a PhD or a postdoc or something like that, whereas others have had completely different routes. There are people who have come in from journalism backgrounds, there are people who have done communications but in different capacities. So no, I don't think for working at EMBL specifically, it has to be a similar path as mine. What is good about EMBL is that they recruit internationally, they take all sorts of experience into play, and ultimately I think it depends on the specific kind of role you are applying to. So there are different teams. There's a design team, there's a digital team, there's an engagement team, and each role has its own requirements. So no, it doesn't, you don't have to follow my path.
Okay, I think that answers Himanshi's question. So one last question is that, do you want to talk about any one memorable moment throughout your journey as a science communicator that you cherish?
That is very difficult to say. I think one of my pieces that I was happiest with was one that I wrote for I Wonder, which is a wonderful magazine. You should all go check it out, by the Azim Premji Foundation that brings it out. And it's meant for middle school science teachers. So that's a very interesting audience. And I wrote a piece on it about dinosaurs and the evolution of birds. And evolutionary science is something, again, that's one of the core areas I'm really interested in. And getting this chance to write about it for a magazine like this was very exciting. And when they decided, I think in the end, this became the cover story for the issue that it was in. So that was a big high, learning that it was going to be on the cover of the next issue and that people appreciated the article. I think, yeah, that was one of my favorite pieces so far. Yeah.
That's so sweet. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Shreya, for joining us today and taking the time out. And I really hope anyone watching this has had fun and also gotten a lot out of this conversation. Do share this video or interview with anyone who might find it useful. And with that, we conclude this episode. Also, just to hint at all our audience, this is our penultimate episode, and with the next episode we'll be wrapping it up and hopefully have more such episodes next year with a new season, new theme, and all of that. Thank you so much, Shreya.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. This was great.
Awesome. I'm glad you had fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you.